What's up guys, Jay's 2 cents here, and in my last video I talked about all the reasons why people still buy Intel, which was a very quick way to get myself labeled as some sort of an Intel shill, or of course there's the usual, how much did Intel pay for this video? They didn't pay anything. I didn't even have a sponsor for that video. We just threw the iFixit ad in there because we liked it. Anyway, so obviously, like I said in that one, there's two sides to every coin. So now I'm gonna give every Intel fanboy an opportunity to call me an AMD shill today. EVGA is proud to announce our latest Z490 for the Win motherboard for the latest Intel 10th Gen Core processors. All new features including a 14-phase digital VRM power design, Wi-Fi 6, 4K HDMI port for onboard graphics, and dual switchable BIOS make the Z490 for the Win a full-featured motherboard for your next build. To see the full list of specs, follow the link in the description below. So today's video is going to obviously be for the reasons why people are switching to AMD. I'm talking about those loyal Intel folks that just suddenly are finding themselves building an AMD machine that they swore they would probably never ever do. And the reason why that is, or why people would even believe that that could be a mindset, is because AMD has been so far behind on the CPU rat race for so long that the idea of AMD actually being competitive and better than Intel in any sense of the word is just foreign to so many people. Now, we're comparing the Ryzen series, right, Zen 1, Zen Plus, Zen 2, to its predecessor, which was FX. And FX was such a royal flop. And it's funny because FX actually succeeded the highly liked and actually well-revered Phenom series, or Phenom 2. Remember the 1090T? That was a legendary CPU for its price performance at the time. But we're going all the way back to like 2009, 2010 era. And then FX just did not deliver. But since then, AMD has gone through a complete rearranging, reorganizing, like 4 more CEOs, and now we're interim CEO, which is Lisa Su, which I think is now full-time CEO because they realized she righted the sinking ship. The equivalent of being in World of Warships and literally exploding and having the ship roll over after you're dead and suddenly go, come back up and then fight and win. That's kind of what's happened with AMD. So that in itself is what's making a lot of people really pay attention to what AMD is doing. So some of the reasons why, and again, these are in no particular order, just like Intel, just some discussion that Phil and I have had. We bring two very different, I think, opinions to what we would look for in a system. Our first on our list here is actually its flexibility and just how friendly it is to both production and development environments. I mentioned in the last video that I worked in IT for a long time, and a lot of things that we worked with were like virtual machines and setting up all sorts of different servers. And for somebody that wants to start getting involved in that and learning by building their own home server or becoming a developer, the amount of flexibility you get with just the amount of cores that are available today on AMD give you so many options. See, if you're running an equivalently priced Intel CPU, you're gonna have less cores than you get on AMD. It's just the way it is right now. And we've already talked in our Intel video, which if you haven't watched it, you should watch it prior to watching this one. I guess you could watch it after this one too, it doesn't really matter. You have to sacrifice something with Intel if you shave the cores off to do something else. So if you're running active virtual machines, those cores are being allocated to the other machine running in a Windows environment. So basically it's a window that looks like another instance of Windows running, and that's because it's a virtual machine. You're making multiple desktops out of that single CPU. You're carving it up and having it do stuff. You can use virtual machines for a server environment type 2. Now, every time you shave off those cores, there's less available to your actual physical box that you're working on. And so with AMD, if you want to start playing around with that and get used to learning setups and all that sort of stuff, of course the drivers and all that and the software you're going to use or the way you do it's a little different on AMD. But in terms of the hardware flexibility, you have so many more cores to play with without actually gimping your physical box that you're sitting at as the main machine running everything. So there's a huge advantage there, although a core clock disadvantage, core count in that instance would definitely reign supreme in that particular environment. And I only bring this one up because a lot of my followers, a huge amount of my followers, are enthusiasts, they're geeks, they work in that environment where they are IT specialists, they are database engineers, they are developers, and they use this type of scenario every single day. And AMD became something that has become much more incentivizing to them by switching from an extreme platform Intel, like X299, X99, where that's the only way you could get that amount of cores that you can get on mainstream AMD today for a heck of a lot cheaper price. So we find that to be a very compelling reason why people are switching. Now moving on to another reason we're going to go to a little bit more of the mainstream reasoning, and that is the rise in popularity of live streaming. Live streaming over the last 5 years has become a multi-billion-dollar industry. Just like YouTube and what that changed for new media, YouTube and live streaming, they're not interchangeable, I think, in terms of necessarily their audiences or what you look for in the machine and how you would do it. When you're doing YouTube, you record, you take the footage off this camera, we bring it into a machine, we ingest it, and then we use our computer to render it. So it's doing one task at that time. If you're editing a video, you're not playing a game at the same time. However, when you're live streaming, you're essentially doing just that. You are live encoding a video feed that is being taken from whatever encoder it is, H.264, some sort of software encoder, not a hardware encoder. Hardware encoder, like the NVIDIA encoder, is happening at a hardware level on the GPU. So if you are doing live streaming on a CPU, then having more cores is going to allow you to be able to keep your game running with plenty of threads to however many world threads the game wants or however multi-threaded it is. Chances are you're going to be able to live stream and have those threads unimpede your gaming performance when it comes to the amount of FPS you're able to get through your CPU throughput. And then obviously with most AMD CPUs now reaching at least 4.1, 4.2 gigahertz on all cores, you're not going to really notice any sort of a significant performance hit. In fact, you probably would never even notice it, although it probably will reduce a little bit just because of overhead and memory usage and all that sort of stuff. The value there in terms of the amount of cores you get is absolutely dominating Intel when it comes to just pure core count, thread count, and that sort of stuff. And I think right now, if you take a look around and you just look at people asking for system build advice, almost always does it include live streaming now. Because it's free. You can live stream on Twitch or whatever platform wants to pop up this month, and then just have at it. There's no reason not to. Give it a shot. And so I think people, when they build systems now, are very rarely building a super budget-based system to only play a game or two. I think they always want the option to live stream, which is perfectly fine. Now, of course, there's other ways to do it through like capture cards and stuff like that. You can even live stream on a laptop at that point because the capture card is doing all the encoding. That's besides the point. I think PC nerds like us want to do it on the machine, and capture cards were always intended to be capturing something like an external device, like an Xbox or a PlayStation or whatever, and ingest it on your computer. The next point we're going to move on to here is the improved hardware quality. Now, if you're not aware, the Asus Crosshair board for AMD and the Asus Maximus board for Intel are the same tier motherboard. It's just Maximus is Intel and then Crosshair is AMD. There was a very huge quality difference between the two motherboards, while not a very big price difference. So you would feel kind of gypped if you took the AMD board out of the box and then the same tier, and some other manufacturers even use the same name for the motherboards. Like I think Aorus even did use the same gaming name. I think MSI even did the gaming X whatever board, and then you got the Intel board and you're like, wait a minute, even the weight is way different here. And I think the reason for that is a lot of manufacturers always knew that the FX processors held such a low market share that they knew that the bulk of their sales were going to be on Intel-based hardware. And so that's where all their quality assurance and all their best quality parts, the best capacitors, the multi-layer PCBs, the more gold content and the traces and all that sort of stuff was specifically on the Intel boards. And then they didn't want to lose money on putting those components on an AMD board that was going to be a very low quality of sales or quantity of sales. So even with the Zen 1 launch, that was the case. Fast forward now nearly 5 years on the Zen 2 launch, the quality of the motherboards has greatly improved. In fact, it almost feels like now you get better feature sets on the AMD boards than you get on the Intel boards, which kind of segues me very smoothly, I might add, into our next piece here, which is PCIe Gen 4. This is probably the first time that I can think of in the 8 years I've been running this channel that a new feature launched on AMD before Intel, and that being obviously PCIe Gen 4. Now, discussion aside on whether or not you benefit at all on graphics performance with PCIe Gen 4, I can tell you right now, you don't benefit at all. You're not going to get any better performance on AMD's Gen 4 than you are on Intel's Gen 3 when it comes to PCIe, mostly because of the clock speed discussions we had on CPUs versus Intel and AMD, so it's all negated, but still GPUs are not fast enough to saturate that level of bandwidth. But what it opens up for you is the insane insanely fast throughput of the new Gen 3 or Gen 4 PCIe Express M.2 devices. And there's a lot of acronyms there. So you can get more than 5,000 megabytes per second read-write on a PCIe Gen 4 SSD versus, what is it, like 3,600, I think, megahertz per second or somewhere around there. Phil can put it on the screen, as you get with Gen 3. Now, again, I think a lot of people might also be like, oh, Jay, it's just like FPS. You're probably never going to notice that transfer rate difference. Yeah, tell that to someone like us who's transferring gigabytes at a time. That time adds up.
Or the people that are running 12 VMs on.
Yeah, or the people that are running 12 VMs that are having to share that storage device, because that gets chopped up too. There's a caveat here. I got to put an asterisk. It now depends on what series chipset you're running for AMD, whether it be X570, B450, B550. There's some differences there in terms of PCI Express speed that through chipset versus through direct contact or connection with the CPU. You're gonna have to actually investigate that yourself to see which motherboard's gonna give you the most PCIe Gen 4 and all that. But the point is, PCIe Gen 4 exists on AMD. And its best use case, like I've just said, is extremely fast storage. Now we're gonna kind of move on to what I think here is the very last point of why people are switching. And I've already mentioned this more than once, and that is just the value. Now, it's funny because that argument's been around for AMD all along, but it was always, well, the best performance per buck for your budget. And by budget, in this instance, I do mean a low budget. This is a little J rant here. me. All right, people have always taken the word budget and applied it to the terminology of low budget. So you gotta understand, the United States has a budget that's in the trillions. Did you see I just put the word budget and trillions in the same sentence? A budget just means you have a finite amount of resource or money or whatever to spend, and you can't go above that. Whether that budget be $500 or $5,000, it's still a budget. Somewhere along the lines, people hear the word budget and automatically make that cheap. They make the word cheap. So AMD's performance per budget was always referred to as the low end. But that's changed, where now if you compare the performance you get across the board on all use cases, not just gaming, because the asterisk here is always going to be if you care about game FPS only the maximum FPS you get in games, then Intel is still where you have to buy a CPU, spend your money, because they're going to give you the best FPS. But Phil and I firmly believe in a Pepsi challenge, and that's basically a blind taste test. If we had an AMD system running at 120 FPS on this machine, on the same monitor and the same graphics card over here on an Intel machine running 140 FPS, you won't know the difference. I know you think you can, you can't. Yeah, I'm talking to you, the one that ran out of this way. Yeah, I can, Jay, you're full of shit. No, you can't. You're full of shit. But when it comes to being like Mario of Mario Kart, where you are the most rounded player on the course, you're not the fastest, you don't turn the best, you don't jump the highest, but you can do all of it really, really, really good. That is what AMD is today. And once they finally get their core clock up to that 5 gigahertz number, I think we're gonna see like the Matrix Reloaded at this point. It is gonna just absolutely kick ass when it comes to what you get for it. But dollar for dollar, a $500 CPU from Intel versus a $500 CPU from AMD, you get better value at that $500 on AMD. Isn't it funny saying a $500 CPU from AMD when, like, just not that long ago that seemed like an astronomical figure that they could ever charge for a CPU because no one would ever pay it. Yet here we are today going, wow, that's a good price because you get so much for it. And that's the reason why people are switching to AMD. They have earned back that trust. Some of the loudest, most boisterous fanboys I have ever encountered usually have a little red icon on their profile picture, because they root for the underdog. They don't care who's in charge or who's in the lead. They will always root for the guy in last place, wanting him to just destroy those people that are used to winning. It's the story of Rudy. AMD was the Rudy CPU. If you don't know what Rudy is, just go and look it up. It's Notre Dame and a football player, a little guy who scored a touchdown. Anyway, whatever, moving on. People love to see a hero lose to an underdog. It's like a UFC upset. The crowd goes wild and people love it and people get energized by it. And so brand loyalty, which I just talked about in my Intel video being something that can be very damaging and a very bad way of thinking, I think in this case, I said in that video that a brand loyal person is okay as long as they've earned that trust, have earned that loyalty, and have retained that loyalty. You're not just being loyal to them for the sake of being loyal without any real reasoning behind it. Enter contrarian attitude here. It's one of those things where AMD's earned it. They've increased their performance as promised. They've maintained support for the chipsets and the sockets as long as they said that they would. They have earned your trust in taking a chance on them when they come out with new stuff. And that's exactly what people have been wanting all along. The only problem is now the fanboys that were always rooting because they wanted the guy in last place to win, they're not equally as annoying when they're winning, trust me. But anyway, guys, what are your reasons for switching to AMD? If you had an Intel system and you were always loyal to Intel and suddenly you find yourself on an AMD rig for the first time, put in the comments down below why you did that. And I think it'd be interesting to see what some of those focus group discussions are down there. Keep them civil. I know you're not gonna, that's okay.
No, not okay, but they're still not gonna.
It's fine. Now, here's the thing regarding where we are in the current stasis of CPU algorithm.
Okay, I don't even know what you were trying to say there.